Welcome, NIKS. Thank you very much. We met not long ago for the first time, but I think it's been immediate friendship in a way. I hope so, at least. The Black Artist Database, it's a very big name for a project and a platform that is actually was created in 2020 and was during the pandemic. So you have been very quickly growth and change also because it came as a Bandcamp platform and now it's Black Artist Database. So taking in from the questions that you early on did, which is very, very much in point with our conversation, let's start on how you create that, why you created that, but above all, what does it mean to be a Black artist to get inside your database? How do you select that without necessarily going into a backlash of being profiling people and say not only you and not the other one? So I really want to know how it is in your brain and in your selection and why you started actually.
So hello everyone, I'm NIKS, the founder of BAD. So it was June 2020, there was a lot of global unrest going on at the time, and a group of friends and I were sat down feeling very powerless at the time in our various European cities, Berlin, Lisbon and London, watching from a distance as to what was happening in the US. But actually it made us, as people who are also victims of this global system of racism and white supremacy, think, okay, we work in a global electronic music industry, let's look at the history, let's look at the current situation of how whitewashed and Eurocentric the sound and the industry has become, how little attention Black artists get, how little money Black artists get, how many festivals are headlined by Black folk globally, not very many. And we thought, okay, what can we do to try and attempt to re-educate and re-center? That's the core objective. How do we re-center Black artists at the forefront of a sound that they started? So we started a Google spreadsheet which was called BLM Bandcamp, because at the time Bandcamp were doing Bandcamp Fridays, where every first Friday of the month they would waive their fees, which meant that 100% of the profits would go to the artist. And that was one of the core issues, that a lot of Black artists don't receive the remuneration that they deserve. So we started the spreadsheet. It started with around 30 names. It was GMT nighttime, so UK, like 8 p.m. We shared it on our socials. And then the next morning we woke up and there were 600 names in the Google spreadsheet. Loads of anonymous animals. I don't know if anyone uses Google spreadsheets, but if someone else is in it, they come up as an anonymous animal. There was all these anonymous animals and loads of people live typing. And I was like, wow, like, okay, there's a global energy, there was a momentum that was happening at the time that a lot of people beyond just my immediate friendship group were feeling. And then it was Bandcamp Friday the next day, and there were around 1,000 artists on the sheet. So lots of people were utilising the spreadsheet at the time. And before the July Bandcamp Friday, I said, look, we need to integrate this as an actual website that people can go through, filter through, search through, but also, more importantly, we can archive and maintain the data, because a Google spreadsheet is a bit too big, that data could have easily got lost. So I spoke to a couple of friends who were developers and I was like, could you quickly make this into a website? And so it was a very basic functional site at the time, but it just continued to grow. So I think maybe by August 2020 we were on maybe 2,000, so labels, Black-owned labels, producers, artists, bands. And then we decided to make it a fully fledged website in May 2021, which is when we rebranded from Black Bandcamp to Black Artist Database, which is also when we integrated Beatport, Juno Records, Juno Downloads onto the website. So that's kind of the genesis of BAD. The backlash is an interesting one because there's actually two perspectives, there's two lenses of backlash. Now there's quite an obvious one, which is people from the non-Black global community. And it's really funny because we offer monthly free production masterclasses. And the first time we announced this, so in the form it says, this is for people who identify as being racially or ethnically black. And someone commented and said, so because my skin is white, I can't attend this? And it was like, yeah. Yeah. So we get backlash from people who unfortunately don't quite understand why this database has to exist. And this is the thing, we're in 2022 and resources like that have to still exist because people aren't doing their jobs, which is quite frankly the truth. The second perspective of people that we receive backlash from, that I'm very open to actually listening to and learning from, are people from the global black community who may fall into a subgroup of black. Because remember, black is not a monolith. You have gay black people, you have black people who are of a different age demographic, you have black people from different regions. So how do we cater to all black people? You can't, and that's not something we say that we do, but what we are conscious of is ensuring that we try to capture as many black people from the global south, because at the moment, as I kind of mentioned to you, the database currently has around 60% black artists, labels, producers and bands from the UK, EU and US, which for me needs to, well,
we talk about.
Yeah, the 40%, which is rest of the world, and around 15% within that 40% are from the African continent, which for me, that percentage needs to increase because the African continent is where it originates from. And I think we often forget and sometimes neglect and still push to the periphery artists from that continent. And I myself have to take myself out of my UK, London-centric lens and challenge myself as to, am I actually looking in the right corners to discover artists away from the kind of UK, US, EU, because, you know, all the publications that we look to that do spotlight black artists also from these northern hemispheres. And so I think it's something we need to all challenge ourselves on.
Yeah, actually, you know, everything you said mirrors the experience with shesaid.so, and this is why I think it's so relevant to have you here, because the backlash is the same. It's like, shall we include men? I mean, we have spoken with about this with Andrea forever, and of course, no, this is a female intersectional platform that devotes itself to a section of society that needed to be visible and highlighted as much as you do with the Black Artist Database. Following up with the Africa thing, and actually thinking about what Heiko said, which I shared, you know, there's a big gap, cultural gap, to understand what is really coming from Africa and what is the... Actually, Africa is not only a continent, it's a continent with so many different countries and regions, and musically outstanding. So it's like, what's have you been kind of investigating already through Africa? What's your relationship personally with Africa? Because I think that, you know, we can all see that the electronic music business right now, it's, and we discussed probably in my third question is about, it's very white. So, and it comes from Detroit, so most of them in Chicago. So it's like, let's talk about it later. But one of the other things that I feel is that I can't know that experience. I really want to know from you. What's your relationship with the continent and how much you want to increase in communication with that continent?
Yeah, it's something like, on a personal note, I do genuinely challenge myself on, because I don't think I do enough, and it's something I want to do more of. Saying that though, we have a global team, and 3 of the team members are from Nairobi. Now I think East Africa has maybe had a bit more of a limelight, but again, the gap has been bridged by white-owned labels or white European people, and that needs to change. We're fortunate enough to have an upcoming sound-filled recording artist, Kamaru, who's from Nairobi, who now lives in Berlin, on the team. So we are tapping more into that region, and we're trying to. What we're actually doing more of is research. So there's kind of a couple of music streaming platforms, so like Boomplay, Meduno, especially in the West Coast, so Nigeria and Ghana, which I think we all kind of know are gonna be in the next 5 or 10 years the new kind of haven for electronic music in terms of festivals, events, rising artists. There's a lot of activity going on in that part of the world. So that's what we're looking. That's where we're looking to. We're actually some members of I and I are going to be going to Ghana this year to do a bit few on the ground things and potentially make something happen. We're actually looking to next year doing an exchange program with a brilliant partner where we bring over 10 artists from the African continent and give them opportunities to perform in key European places. And I think that's important because A, it's going to be done by black people, for black people, because there's an element as well of kind of like ownership, and there's something that it's just a lot more authentic and organic when it's done from someone from your community. So the African continent is absolutely one that we're looking towards more, looking at more of the artists that are there. We also do monthly research participant groups from artists from the database itself, where we ask artists from different parts of the world. Australasia, as I mentioned to you, one. South America and African continent are ones that we're tapping more into to understand where do you go and discover your music from? What artists are you listening to? What sound is going on in your area? What would you like more of from people from this part of the world? What would you like more of from BAD? I think those are the kind of 3 strategies that we're working on. And then on a personal note, my personal relationship with Africa is an interesting question because I think only black people really understand what it feels like. You know, my mum is from St. Lucia, which is a small Caribbean island, which was colonised by French and British. And St. Lucia actually has never had war other than when the French and British were fighting to own that island. Do you know how crazy that is? So my mum's surname is Dolononsi, which is a French surname. I don't know, on my mum's side, what my actual African lineage is. And it's something that I think is quite important to highlight because there's that disconnect for a lot of us that we actually just don't know where we are from. But a bit like what Suchi was saying before, we're trying to reconnect with our heritage and culture. And I think this is a really good way for people like myself who are living in the UK or Europe, who love the underground electronic sound, and we understand where it came from, you know, the Detroits, as we mentioned, and we understand that the innovators and the pioneers were black people, but we want to really reconnect with our actual roots, you know, which is somewhere in Africa. And then on my dad's side, as I mentioned to you before, my granddad, this is a bit of a random but interesting fact, during the 50s and 60s was going to and fro the Democratic Republic of Congo. At the time, Patrice Lumumba, who was the president, who unfortunately was assassinated, was doing a lot of work at the time to try and build an African nation, to get rid of external non-African companies. So there was a lot of work going on at the time, which I think now our generation are trying to rebuild that groundwork in obviously a completely different sphere, arts, music and culture, but it's actually about rebuilding, setting a foundation for future generations that's built by us, and having that, because ownership, as I said, is really important, having a foundation that we can build and grow off. So then in 10, 15, 20 years' time, the next generation of black artists have something there for them already that they can look to, they have people that they can look up to. And I think yesterday, Hannah Shawbola made a really good point about like the new wave of our gen, you know, the next gen, if we're talking about the next gen, challenging the status quo and building our own structures.
Yeah, and just to be informative for the audience and for me, myself, what are the numbers of BAD? So how many people you have now working for you? How is the economically sustainable? And how many artists and how many groups are engaging with BAD right now?
So at the moment, we're a team of 16 and we operate between London, Lisbon, Berlin, Nairobi, Geneva. I think that's it. Yes. So actually, the one continent that we don't have any presence is the US, and it's actually something that I'd like to tap into. So if anyone is listening and is has
US tips?
any US tips, which is interesting because you would think that maybe we do, but actually a lot of the artists like the Ace Momas, the Moma Reddys, the James Banguras, there are a lot of rising artists from the US. In terms of numbers on the site, we're currently at around 4,000, and as I mentioned, it's split between labels, producers, artists and bands, with a kind of 60% EU, US, UK split and 40% rest of the world. And then in terms of like subgroups, similar to Daytimers, we have a Discord, and we use those kind of platforms to stay in contact with as many artists as possible. We also have like drop-in sessions, as I mentioned, the monthly kind of research participant groups, but also we've just onboarded a community manager, which is a role that I think is quite important with the kind of platforms that we're running, to just kind of be on the ground a bit more and with eyes and ears to really be at the heart of the audience or the artists and producers that we're working with. And then in terms of financially, that's also an interesting one, and one that I always say more grassroots platforms should be as transparent as they can about, because, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy when you are growing so rapidly and you have to maintain that growth. And then from the perspective of being a founder, you're constantly thinking, what can I be doing more of? Because you're always thinking of what you're not doing.
Yeah.
Which is, I saw Andrea nodding her head. It's to your own detriment. You're like, how can I serve? What can I be doing more of? And it's like, you have to remind yourself, like, I'm one human being. I'm doing loads. I need to take my time, you know. So it's a combination of, when we started, it was self-funded between myself and Kay, who's the other director. And then it grew rapidly. And one of the things we were convicted in is, like, we don't want people to work on a voluntary basis, because particularly from our community, it's just something that we didn't feel comfortable with. So it was a combination of being self-funded, grants, and partnerships.
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 Not an easy thing, because of course you need to maintain your integrity towards your community. At the same time, you can't choose any brand. Mm-hmm. You need to know who is behind the brand, which, as I guess all of you know. That's the criteria. I mean, is it difficult to face it? And how politically involved is BAD with Black Lives Matter and any kind of, you know, involvement with actions, not only in the part of artistic direction?
So we have a terms and conditions document. So when we get approached by partners, before we even respond, we send them the terms and conditions and we say, please read this and then reassess what you've proposed to us. And if you feel like it's still in alignment, then we will review it and give you a kind of yes or no. And actually, if you're kind of committed in the same way, if your ethics and morals are in alignment with ours, you will immediately know. And if they're not, you'll be like, do you know what, actually, I don't think this is right. And so we do that first, and it's actually just a good way to test people, because
It's necessary.
it's necessary it's a vetting process. Yeah. You have to vet through the partners that are like, actually, we don't have the same morals and ethics as this platform. Maybe there's an alternative thing we should work on, activation we should work on, or sometimes there are really obvious ones that are like, yes, this is what we're trying to achieve. So we provide the terms and conditions, we have a vetting process, and then we go through what the kind of partnership will look like. But one of the things that we include in our terms and conditions, as to which aligns with what other platforms or communities do we work with, is we ask each partner to commit donating 10% of what we are being paid to one of the lists of charities that we have. So every partner we work with donates 10% to charities that we have. So Sister Space is one.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's heard of Sister Space, but they're a charity that provide housing for black women who are victims of domestic violence in the UK. And there are various other ones. So it means that we're still helping another entity, because one of the things that we're also aware of is we don't want to monopolise and be the only black platform that takes opportunities, if you will. That's quite a nasty way of putting it, but sometimes that does happen when, you know, you grow and everyone's like, oh, there's BAD.
Yeah, but you're a legit point of reference. I mean, there's many, well, probably not many, but there's other legit point of reference. But, you know, to be a point of reference means a social ethical responsibility. So that's why I was like building in to know how much a platform like yours gets, you know, racial, of course, racism, and how you also discuss these matters if you ever get into these matters, which are for a community manager or social media manager, that's a nightmare. So how do you deal with that?
It's weird because from what I see on our social media platforms, we've only ever had like a few just ignorant comments that are like, why can't I attend as a white person? Or when is there going to be a free production masterclass for me? But we've never received, and we ask a lot of the artists as well who deliver masterclasses because they share it on their socials. So, you know, for example, people like Lorraine James or Acemo or Roxy Moore who have delivered on masterclasses that have, you know, thousands of followers. And we say to them, did you receive any sort of weird backlash? And they're like, no. So, I don't know, maybe that's a good thing, that's a good sign. But in terms of, like, internally, we do also have a guideline which is based on ONS, so Office of National Statistics in the UK, as to definitions of what is black, which is a very grey area.
Wow, that's incredible. Shady.
Which is it's a very grey area. So in the UK, according to ONS, if you are 50% or more African or Caribbean heritage, you can identify as black. So I guess that's the guideline. That's the guideline that we utilise across our kind of offerings, etc. But yeah, it's an interesting one because one of the big learnings for me, particularly when speaking with artists from the African continent, is they don't define themselves as black. Like when you're the majority, why you don't call yourself that thing, right?
It's like being a female producer.
Yeah.
It's like we are producers stop.
So all the African artists we're working with, they're like, yeah, we don't use the word black in Africa. We're just African. So it's all these kind of new learnings, and then it makes me think like, oh wow, it actually makes me think even more about like my intersections and like my identity, and you know, how come I've always had to identify as a black female, you know, all these kind of things. But anyways,
but it's very interesting.
It's very interesting
because if you want, you all gave a name that is very defined. I mean, BAD is like okay, so this is the place to be. And you know, there's two things also, and we are at IMS. And do you reckon, with your experience with artists and producers, that there is a need of promoting also, to have black promoters and have more black, you know, behind the scenes, not only on stage? Because it happens that I'm completely obsessed with the PP thing, that female producer and female promoters, they need to be out there. And female promoters, you can count them on my hand, and probably you all know that. So what about, do you know the scene on the black side of it? What is the scene like? Aside, of course, when we talk US and UK, but you know, the word is not the US and UK only.
yes,
Fortunately.
so you can count maybe the hands. Maybe let's just take the pinky finger. When we put on our first in real life event in London, we said it has to be at a black-owned venue. So for about a month, we were going through every venue, and not even London, just like the UK. And in London, there is one black-owned venue, which is Colour Factory, if anyone hasn't heard of it. So, yeah, it's insane. And, like, London's a huge city. So going back to the ownership, so venues, for example, there aren't many that are owned by black folk. In terms of the kind of bookers, promoters, programmers, etc., again, there aren't many, and there are a few that we know. So, you know, someone like Judy Griffiths from Fabric, who's been there for years, and she's amazing. She's
the light.
She is
of the house.
She is the light of the house. But again, it's like her and a handful, and you can literally count the same people on your hands. And it is an issue because, unfortunately, if you are not from the community, you don't instinctively think outside of your box. So when you're booking, I mean, I'm not talking on behalf of me because I do, but unfortunately when the same demographic of people are booking, they look within that box, and that's the issue. Black artists are not at the forefront of their minds. So when it comes to festival lineups, or even compilations with A&R managers, actually a really funny fact, the Trey's or 30-year compilation, which came out in August 2020, the A&R manager at the time actually emailed me and said, I use Black Artist Database to create this compilation. And if you look at the Trezor 30th compilation, it is majority black and brown artists. And I thought, well, that's an exceptional example of how non-black people in those positions can utilise the resource to actually make a difference.
And not assuming that I don't know where to look for.
That's it. And,
and
I think
classical.
That's the classic answer. I don't know where to look. And so I think absolutely there needs to be more black people in those positions. But also, if there aren't black people in those positions, because I think the other issue is people just expect the work to be done by black people. So if you're a non-black person in that position, you do the work. In fact, you do the work 10 times harder because you are responsible for spotlighting people from an array of backgrounds. So as the A&R manager, took the initiative and did additional work, went through the database and created an amazing compilation. It doesn't always have to be black people doing the work, but there needs to be more black people in those positions because there aren't enough. And there also aren't enough in the kind of C-level suite positions, the decision-making positions.
It's incredible because it also leads to the fact that if you think about media, that it's a powerful way to channel, visibility for those artists. All those media are mostly owned by white people. So is there any media that you will kind of highlight that is not owned by white people?
There are a few... there are a few that are in our electronic industry that I will spotlight. So there's 2 booking agencies that are owned by 2 black women. So Outer Agency, which is owned by Karen Abdullah, and they look after Machine Woman, Roxy Moore, Juan Atkins when they perform live, and a few others. And the second one is Disc Woman, which is owned by Frankie, which look after people such as Aquia, Umfang, and many others. And I'm using booking agents specifically because through our experience, again, of when we're booking artists for our shows, it's always interesting, that dynamic of black artists who are booked by white agents. And it's quite an interesting, dynamic.
I've done it for a long time.
It's an interesting dynamic. But yeah, they're 2 black-owned, agencies and black female, which is another thing, because there isn't much black female representation or ownership in the electronic industry. There's also it's a brand partnership, so they deliver brand partnerships for artists called We Are Taboo, which is run by Kenny Oshelun, and she lives in Berlin, and she does some really great work with global electronic artists and brands and connects the dots. She's actually someone everyone should check out. She's amazing. Boomplay, which is in Nigeria, which is one of the kind of leading playlisting and streaming services that I personally would like to explore more of and really understand, who are the artists on here, how is it being utilised, what other countries in Africa are they serving, what numbers, because again, we kind of look to the 4 or 5 platforms here, but there are so many out there on the actual continent as well, that I think in the next 5 or 10 years will be a booming market.
So have you ever been asked to be kind of speaking in booking agencies, in music, to speak about BAD and being there to kind of learn how to change the workforce from inside? I mean, that's kind of necessary, isn't it?
Yeah, I get asked to speak, but also deliver workshops. Yeah. I'm actually doing one next month with a group of European festival bookers and promoters.
Wow, much needed.
Much needed. So hopefully there will be some change. But yeah, we do get asked a lot, and sometimes we have to say no, because it's exhaustive, and the labour of the work behind it. And I think people need to remember is, we already do so much work, and we can't exhaust ourselves from doing the work. There is a resource there. There are other resources, as I know you mentioned earlier. The credibility is here, absolutely, and where I can, I absolutely do go and speak at conferences. I mean, on Tuesday I was at a conference called Liverpool Against Racism, which was in Liverpool, and I was talking alongside David Olusuga, which is mad. He's like a British historian. and, you know, delivering workshops, and I absolutely do where I can, but I also have to remind myself I need to preserve my energy and almost, you know, force people into independently doing some groundwork themselves, because people rely a lot on black labour, and that needs to stop.
Definitely. Is there any question in the audience, or we keep on going? Because I'm fascinated by the project. I think it's very much needed, and I also think that, do you curate stages, or do you create stages in festivals? Do you create stages in clubbing?
Yeah.
How do you do that process with the bookers or the promoters?
So this is actually the really nice element, because there are, you know, to be positive, there are a lot of bookers and promoters out there that really want to genuinely make a change and work with us. So we're actually next month doing a collaborative event with Village Underground in London, where we're bringing over Ace Moma from New York, OK Williams, Emerald, and that's going to be a bigger party of us, because Village Underground is a huge venue. We are also creating this, I don't know if I can actually mention it because it's not been announced yet, but we're creating a stage.
It's actually recorded.
Yeah, I've just realised, I was like, maybe. We're creating a stage with a festival which is happening on the bank holiday in August, and they're a big festival, and they're great. And yeah, they're amazing. And we've got some.
We want spelling in it.
We've got some really amazing overseas DJs and lineups, and we also deliver, as we spoke before, we deliver in real life kind of panels and conferences. So in March, we were at AVA, which was at Printwork. So AVA are a festival, a Belfast-based festival, but every March they do a conference.
Female promoter, all of you.
Yeah, Sarah McGrath. She's amazing. And we were given the main room to deliver a BAD talk. So we do a lot of kind of collaborative work where we're given the space to curate stages or create panels and conferences, and working with like-minded bookers, people, powerhouses such as Sarah, and people that really genuinely want to make space for people like us and give us the opportunity, and not just put us, you know, in the side room at AVA, giving us the main room to talk in front of 1,000 people. And because that's the point, we need to be put in the bigger spaces, the bigger rooms, so that more people can hear the narrative and what we're trying to talk about and discuss.
And talking about ownership, is the platform owned by you, or are you just a community, or are you all black?
Yeah, yes, do you know what, I laugh, but it's not funny, because a lot of, I think over the past years, there are a lot of things that people thought were black owned that weren't, and we were like, oh, I thought that was run by a black person, and it's like, not. We're 100% black owned, so every member of the team is black. In the description that I gave previously, 50% or more African or Caribbean, and it's 100% owned by BAD, so us as an entity.
This is a private company.
It's a private company, yeah, and it's 100% black owned. And I just want to make that clear, because I think when we were called Black Bandcamp, a lot of people were like, oh, it's owned by Bandcamp. And it's like, no, it was never owned by Bandcamp. Bandcamp was the only platform that was integrated at the time. And that was part of the reason why we changed the name. So that it was like, we are independent.
I mean, the wishful thinking is that you can be streamed in a black-owned streaming scenario, maybe.
I mean, that would be amazing.
I mean, that's the ideal word. So how do you feel about excluding the rest of, you need to be selective. And that process of selection, you will probably become more and more selective in the years. But does this expose did you have any challenge, any backlash within the artist itself? The fact that somebody was included that shouldn't be, or morally or ethically, not even racially. I mean, I'm not getting there, but what were? I mean, I want to know about the guts of it. What kind of problems you really could have?
We can go into the racial side of it, because BAD is an open crowdsource, so it's not gatekept, and I think there's lots of pros and cons of that. Of course, the pros are we're not gatekeeping anything. It's an open format. Anyone can submit anyone. But the cons of that is, as you mentioned, there can be challenges as to actually maybe there needs to be a level of vetting or assessment. So we do have a database team who do individually assess every submission, but with that again is still like a challenge because black is subjective, but also when we first started we had 2 artists from North Africa. We spoke about North Africa. There were 2 artists from North Africa who were submitted to the database. For me, fine, they're North African. It was the 2 artists themselves who actually emailed us and said, please can I be removed because I don't believe I should be occupying the space where I actually am not treated in the same way as a sub-Saharan African black person would be. And I thought that was so interesting because I hadn't even considered that because again, I live in the UK. The kind of sub-black groups in Africa were never at the forefront of my mind. So that is an element that is...
I mean, that's the conversation. You're getting a knowledge, an intel that nobody of us, well, especially not me, being white, but that you get a knowledge of that kind of shades that actually we can learn all from. Because, first of all, it's the first time that I actually do that talk with you, and I actually was raised on jazz, and I thought I knew, and then you suddenly realize you don't know anything about that racial differences, and I think that I'm profoundly interested in the shady thing about about yourself personally as a woman, as a black woman in London, born in London, which is for me a privileged environment, even if it looks like not. But we were discussing about Italy, for instance. There's a huge, profound racial problem in Italy, especially in the music business. And I found a friend of mine in Milan, and I told you about it, that suggested some black artists in Milan to create their own booking agency, not allowing or looking for a booking agency, but creating their own booking agency to work under their conditions and not the conditions of the white one. So still that power that you actually empowering people to build their own music industry in the black side of it, is it?
I think empowerment is such a powerful word, and I'm personally not aware of it because I'm so in it until someone says, Sherelle's actually a really good example of this. So Sherelle, she said to me, I actually nearly cried when she told me this. We was at her Phonox residency, and she said, she was quite drunk also, but she said, NIKS, the only reason I started This Is Beautiful Music, which is her record label, which she only curates for black artists, so she only releases music by black artists. She said, it's because of Black Artist Database. It's something that had been on my mind, and when I saw that another black female did it, I thought, I'm going to do it. And so that empowerment is definitely there, and you're not even aware of it until someone comes and tells you, oh, actually, because I've seen this, it made me feel confident enough to do it. And so in the same regard that you were saying about, in Milan, they should be making their own booking agents, etc. I think we're seeing a lot of it on the rise. Even in Washington, DC, there's a new kind of collective called Black Rave Culture. I saw Jameson has his Make Techno Black Again cap, which is run by DeForest Jr. If no one's heard of DeForest Jr., he is amazing. The most intelligent person I think I know. He released a book a couple of months ago, which he was touring across Europe, and has made this new platform called Make Techno Black Again. So there's all these emerging voices and narratives and platforms and communities that traditionally have always sat on the periphery that are now coming to the forefront, and I think it's so important for us to build our own foundation because it just has not existed for so long. And still connected to this, but a couple of weeks ago I had the opportunity to interview Carl Craig and Kevin Saunderson and Robert Owens for one of our listening lounges at LWE for the Hacienda. And these are like the innovators and pioneers of the sound who are now in their late 50s, early 60s. And I just thought, wouldn't it be how amazing if we had our own structures and foundations and platforms. I mean, those are just 3 examples of people that have still maintained for 3 or 4 decades of their career and are still getting booked and people still remember who they are and respect them. But I just thought, if we had our own infrastructure, all the ones that get forgotten about, and I think yesterday Becky Hill made a really interesting point about black female vocalists who just get dismissed. And this is exactly why we need to build our own infrastructures, because these artists who created the industry and the sound that we're in, so many of them we don't even know about, so many of them get forgotten about, so many of them get lost. You know, look at a guy called Gerald who didn't get paid a single penny for Voodoo Ray. If we had our own infrastructures, that would not have happened. These things would not have happened. Black female vocalists would not be not cited on any, track titles or copyrights, etc. So, yeah, I think it's very important.
We always forget one of the persons that most inspired me. Well, I am the age of those technologies, and I work with them. But one of the person that most inspired me back in the day when I was booking for techno with All Black was Matt Mike at Underground Resistance, and his kind of involvement and action was completely, very strict. I lived through a particular. That's a note that you made me remember, and I think it's very important for the history. Is his fight for Jaguar, and he went to meet them. He never used to fly. He went to meet them, and he went to meet them to discuss the fact of Jaguar and the signing of Jaguar and the problem with Jaguar. And I know that he never went out to Detroit, and he went to Cannes just to make sure that everybody knew that there was issues, and he wanted to shout out that issue. And then he went back to Detroit. It was like, for me, that kind of role models that I had in techno. That's why I think, in a finishing touch, because Andrea is like,